Welcome back. This is Unit 1, Video 5. We're talking about physical change today. Matter can undergo various types of physical changes, and it could be a handful of different things. An important thing to remember is that when a substance undergoes a physical change, the identity of the substance does not change. The simplest physical changes that we're going to see would include maybe changing the size of an object or the shape of an object. For instance, if you take a piece of paper and tear it in half or crumple it up, that was a type of physical change. The identity of the substance is the same. It's still a piece of paper, it's just now it's crumpled up. It's no longer a whole piece of paper. So we change the shape and we change the size, but it's still a piece of paper. An important type of physical change is what we call a change of state. Remember, we talked about the three states of matter in one of the previous videos. We had solid, liquid, and gas. A change of state is where a substance moves from one of those states to another. So, again, just like any other physical change, it's important to remember the identity of the substance does not change. It's still going to be the same chemical. So if we think about water, water is a chemical and it can exist in all three states of matter. It could be ice, that's a solid. It could be water as the liquid form, or it could be water vapor, which sometimes we refer to it as steam. In all three of those things, these states have different properties, they behave differently, but in all three states of matter, it's still water. Okay, so I'm going to fill in the blanks up here while we work on the diagram down here. When possible, I like to include pictures. I think it goes a little better. So, first thing I'm going to do is draw some states of matter here. So this is going to be a solid. Sometimes Chem 1 textbooks use this ice cube shape to indicate a solid. And I'm going to say liquid, look like a water droplet, and gas, which is going to look like a balloon. So those are my three states of matter. So the process of changing from a solid to a liquid, that is common terminology. We're talking about melting here. So following solid to liquid, I'm going to write that in, melting. Changing a liquid to a solid, not a real scientific term, freezing. So liquid to solid, following the arrow carefully. There we have freezing. This next one is a little bit tricky. The process of changing a liquid into a gas. Now, a lot of people would throw out the term evaporation. That's not quite accurate. Evaporation is a little bit too specific. This phase change is known as vaporization. Vaporization is the general term for a liquid changing into a gas. Evaporation is a specific type where the surface of, let's say, water, the liquid is escaping into a gas from the surface. And so it's a little bit more specific, but for our class, we're talking about liquid to gas vaporization. changing a gas to a liquid, fairly common term, condensation. So I'll write that down here. Gas to liquid, condensation. But then we have some other changes of state where we could skip one of these entirely. So when a solid changes directly into a gas, so we're talking about a solid skipping the liquid form and going straight from solid to gas. This is a process known as sublimation. And a good example of sublimation, change my pen color here. If you think about dry ice, maybe you have some familiarity with it. It comes from, you can buy it at the grocery store sometimes. It's this big block of a solid, and it doesn't melt, it just, you can kind of see gases escaping off of it, and it's just the solid turning directly into a gas. This is especially useful for things like maybe shipping frozen goods. For instance, I used to run a blood bank, and sometimes we would have to ship things like frozen plasma or frozen red blood cells to another hospital. And so what we would do is we had this big tank, and I could make a bunch of dry ice in a cooler. We would pack everything in there, put more dry ice on top of it, seal it up, and ship it. And so over the course of an overnight shipping, as this dry ice is warming up, the gas is escaping out of it. And the advantage of this is really two advantages. Dry ice is negative 69 degrees Celsius usually. So we're talking about negative 150 Fahrenheit approximately. Very cold. So it keeps things frozen, and as it gets warmer, it's not creating that scenario of your cooler on the camp out. Towards the end of a couple days of camping, your cooler has this slush. It's mostly water with a few ice chips in it. And so that's what you want to avoid when you're shipping frozen goods. Similar idea, you can buy ice cream on the internet and they will ship it to you overnight in dry ice. That would be sublimation. And the next one, a process of changing a gas directly into a solid. So we're talking about starting as a gas, and it is turning directly into a solid. This process is called deposition. And the thing I usually think about with deposition is maybe the frost inside of a freezer. If you have one of the big freezers, maybe it's in your garage or in your basement, you'll notice that over the course of a year or two, it develops very thick walls of ice. And that's the result of deposition. Nobody was pouring liquid water in there. But on a humid day, when you open it, the humidity, the water vapor gets inside, and then as it cools very quickly, it turns directly into a solid. You may have the similar type of idea of frost on a windshield. If you go outside in the wintertime, you might notice that your windshield has a lot of frost all over it. It didn't rain or anything to put water on it, but the water vapor in the air went through the process of deposition to become a solid. And sometimes I would maybe even refer to this as a frost deposit. That's it for this video. We'll pick up with the next video in section 6.